Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the savings which were once enough to buy a house can now only buy a single loaf of bread. Imagine your monthly salary losing its value the moment it reaches your hands, and people carrying money not in wallets but in wheelbarrows. This is not a science fiction story. This is the real depiction of hyperinflation and the destruction it brings. We think of money as a stable resource. We believe that the only thing we can truly rely on is money. But history tells us something else. Past hyperinflations didn't only wipe out bank accounts. They destroyed governments, families, even empires. They passed through societies like a financial wildfire and exposed how fragile our systems really are. Now you will see how five countries, five powerful economies, turned into ashes and what this did to them. And while watching, never forget this. Inflation does not arrive with a loud sound at first. It crawls like a snake. It moves quietly, whispering as it goes. Some people notice it, but by the time they try to escape, it's already too late. Now let's start with Germany. 1923, the Weimar Republic. After World War I, Germany was crushed under debt. The Treaty of Versailles had imposed more than 132 billion gold marks in reparations on Germany, an amount so large it could take generations to pay. So what did Germany do about this situation? At first, they printed money, a lot of it. At the beginning, this method looked like it worked. Then prices doubled, tripled, and the market exploded. By November 1923, the German mark had become almost a worthless piece of paper. A single loaf of bread cost 200 billion marks. People were burning money to stay warm. Children were playing with stacks of banknotes like building blocks. Middle-class families watched their lifetime savings disappear within weeks. But what about the deeper damage? It wasn't just money that collapsed. Trust collapsed. When a society loses faith in its money, everything falls apart. Trade, contracts, savings, salaries, all of it ends. This financial destruction opened the door to social collapse. Despair and chaos followed. 10 years later, Hitler rose to power. And this economic trauma was one of the foundations of that rise. Now let's move to Zimbabwe, the early 2000s. President Robert Mugabe's government was struggling with sanctions and economic isolation, while massive land seizures destroyed agriculture. And what was the government's response to this? Printing money. Again. The spiral began once more. By 2008, Zimbabwe's inflation rate was estimated at 79.6 billion%. Prices were multiplying every 24 hours. The government kept adding zeros to the banknotes. 10 million, 100 billion, $100 trillion notes were printed, and eventually they gave up. They switched to the US dollar and the South African rand. So what was the cost? Was it only numbers on paper? No. Hyperinflation erased pensions, destroyed industries, and created an entire generation of economic refugees. Real wealth, land, skills, and tangible assets were the only things that survived. Now let's move to another case. Hungary, 1946. This is known as the worst hyperinflation ever recorded in history. After World War II, Hungary was economically devastated. The government began printing large amounts of its currency, the pengo, rapidly and repeatedly. As a result, prices doubled every 15 hours. The inflation rate reached 41.9 quadrillion%. Money became so worthless that the government introduced a new unit called the milpengo. One sheet of paper equaled 1 million pengo. Then they issued the B-pengo, which represented 1 billion pengo. None of this worked. Eventually, the pengo was entirely abandoned and replaced with the forint. So what was lost? Everything. Hungary's middle class was completely wiped out. Savings disappeared. The government lost legitimacy. Hyperinflation didn't just destroy the economy. It destroyed the past. Now let's look at Latin America. Venezuela, from the 2010s to today. A country rich in oil and natural resources, but rotten politically. Years of corruption, price controls, nationalizations, and relentless money printing dragged the country into disaster. The government kept printing money to cover deficits, subsidize collapsing programs, and maintain control. Then inflation soared. In 2018, inflation surpassed 1 million%. If you didn't spend your salary on the day you received it, it would lose value by the next day. Store shelves emptied. Installment shopping vanished. Bartering returned. Doctors and engineers left the country to work elsewhere. The government kept adding zeros to the banknotes, until one day they removed 6 zeros overnight. But the damage cannot be erased. Hyperinflation collapsed Venezuela's economy, destroyed its healthcare system, and forced millions of people to become refuge. Now let me show you a lesser-known example. Yugoslavia, the 1990s. After the collapse of the Soviet Union and the violent disintegration of the country, the economy collapsed too. In 1993, monthly inflation reached 313 million%. Prices doubled every 1.4 days. The government issued new currencies over and over, and every time people's savings were wiped out. Citizens used German marks and US dollars to survive. The official currency became a joke, useful only for lighting cigarettes or covering empty store windows. And beneath all these examples lies the exact same process. A government falls into crisis and prints money. Trust disappears, money collapses, society falls apart. Different countries, different histories, but the same mistakes. So after all these events, do you think countries have learned? Today, global debt levels are at the highest point in history. The national debt of the United States alone is over $34 trillion and still rising. Around the world, central banks have printed trillions of dollars in the last decade to support economies, suppress interest rates, and stimulate markets. For a while, this idea worked. Inflation was low, growth continued, and the system held until it lost its strength. In 2021 and 2022, something happened. After years of low inflation, prices suddenly shot upward. Supply chains were shocked, the war in Ukraine began, energy crises erupted, and yes, the trillions printed finally showed their effects. Central banks panicked and aggressively raised interest rates. Markets shook, and ordinary people who never benefited from the cheap money era began to feel the squeeze. Rents increased, food prices rose, salaries no longer kept up, and after a long time people started asking, what is money? Who controls it? What happens when trust breaks? We are not in a hyperinflation zone yet, but there are warning signs, not only in prices but in mindset, in the belief that printing money can solve problems, in the belief that we can borrow forever, in the belief that central banks will always save us. But these are dangerous paths. These are the same mistakes made by Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, and Venezuela. The only difference now is scale, because never before in history has the entire global economy been this interconnected, this debt-dependent, and this reliant on central banks. If trust cracks now, it won't just affect one country, the entire system will fail. And now this comes to you. You cannot control the Federal Reserve or the European Central Bank, but you can control your exposure, your savings, your habits, your mindset. So what can you learn from the 5 biggest hyperinflations in history? First, real wealth is not paper money. It is purchasing power. It is land, skill, tangible assets, useful relationships, and inner resilience. In all these countries, printed wealth vanished. But those who had tangible assets and could produce value outside the system survived. Second, trust is everything. Currencies don't collapse because of ink. They collapse because belief fades. When people stop believing in the value of their money, the game ends. And this belief erodes faster than most people think. And once it's gone, it is almost impossible to restore. Third, inflation punishes the unprepared. It is fast, it compounds, and it hits people who survive paycheck to paycheck the hardest. Governments may reduce their debts through inflation, but your grocery bill doesn't get cheaper from it. That is why financial education isn't only for building wealth. It's for protecting it. So what does protection mean today? Not trusting the system blindly, but understanding it. Reducing unnecessary debt risk, diversifying your assets, not just in stocks, but in different systems as well. Maybe some physical gold or foreign currency. Maybe learning a skill that stays valuable no matter what the market does. Maybe building a lower cost lifestyle. And most importantly, remember this. Inflation is a hidden tax, a form of theft. It slowly erodes your financial freedom. And if you don't know how to protect yourself, you begin to collapse along with it. The 5 worst hyperinflations in history did not happen randomly. They caused them. They pursued bad policies. They went to war. They denied reality. They acted out of arrogance. And they tried to convince people of the lie that printing money would fix everything. But now, you know better. You've seen the big picture. And when someone tells you, you wouldn't understand, you now know exactly how to respond. History does not repeat itself. But if you fail to understand it, it will destroy you anyway. If you've watched this far and this video has given you a new perspective, subscribe and let's witness history together. See you next time.